The research station on planet Cathera looked small against the endless white landscape. Wind howled across the ice fields, carrying snow that stung like tiny needles. Inside the heated building, scientist Jiho stood before a large window, staring at something that made no sense. The burning ice plains stretched out before him for thousands of kilometers. From a distance, the ice looked normal, white and frozen like any other ice field. But Jiho knew better. He had been studying this place for 2 years now. He had seen what happened when anything touched that ice. It burned, not with fire, not with heat. The ice stayed cold and frozen. But anything that stepped on it would burst into flames and turn to ash within seconds. Ships, robots, even protective suits made from the strongest materials in the galaxy. Nothing could cross those plains and survive. Jiho was a Veltan, one of the smartest species in the Galactic Alliance. His people had solved problems across 100 worlds. They had built cities in space and tamed wild planets, but the burning ice plains made him feel helpless. "Sir, the morning tests are ready," said Kaya, his research assistant. She was also Veltan, with the same blue-gray skin and large dark eyes that helped their species see in low light. Jiho nodded and followed her to the testing area. Other scientists from different worlds were already there. There was Vorth, a tall reptilian Skarn who specialized in energy shields. Beside him stood Neela, a small furry Quillen who understood materials better than anyone. They had been trying to cross the burning ice plains for 300 years. Every species in the galaxy had attempted it. All had failed. "Today we test the new energy barrier," Vorth announced. His scaled hands worked over a control panel. "I have modified the shield frequency based on yesterday's readings." A small robot rolled forward. It was covered in a shimmering blue field that sparkled. With energy, the robot approached the edge of the ice plains where normal ground met the strange burning ice. "Readings are stable," reported Neela, watching her instruments. "Shield strength at maximum." The robot rolled onto the ice. For a moment, nothing happened. Then bright flames erupted around the shield. The robot continued forward for 3 more steps before the flames broke through. In seconds, the machine was nothing but ash scattered across the ice. "Failure again," Jiho said quietly. "The ice burns through everything." "It makes no sense," Vorth hissed in frustration. "Ice should not burn. Fire and ice are opposites. Yet here they work together," added Neela, her whiskers twitching with worry. 300 years of trying, and we are no closer to understanding." Jiho looked at the readings on his tablet. The energy patterns from the ice were unlike anything in their databases. The ice seemed to recognize when something was trying to cross it. It would wait, almost like it was thinking, then strike with those impossible flames. "Perhaps we should admit defeat," suggested Kaya. "The Galactic Council is considering this planet off limits permanently." "No," Jiho said firmly. "There must be a way. Intelligence always finds a path." Behind them, someone cleared their throat. Maybe intelligence is not enough. They turned to see a human woman standing in the doorway. She was young, maybe 30 Earth years, with dark hair tied back and practical, clothes designed for cold weather. Her name was Minji, and she had arrived on Cathera 3 weeks ago as an archaeologist. "Excuse me?" Jiho asked, trying to hide his annoyance. Humans were new to the galaxy, barely 200 years since first contact. What could they possibly know that advanced species had not figured out? "I have been studying the cave paintings near the eastern cliffs," Minji explained, stepping into the room. "The ancient art shows creatures crossing the ice plains regularly." "Impossible," said Vorth. "No life form can survive on the burning ice." Minji pulled out a tablet and showed them photos of cave walls covered in primitive drawings. "Look at these images. Large 4-legged animals with thick fur crossing the ice. The locals called them mammoths." "Extinct creatures," Neela said dismissively. "Gone for thousands of years if they ever existed at all." "But what if they are not extinct?" Minji asked. "What if they found a way to cross the ice that we have not considered?" Jiho studied the cave paintings. The drawings were crude but detailed. They showed huge creatures that looked like ancient earth elephants but larger and covered in thick fur. In the paintings, these mammoths walked across areas that could only be the burning ice plains. Primitive artwork, Jiho said finally. These people probably never saw the ice plains themselves. Just stories passed down and changed over time. Or maybe, Minji said quietly, they knew something we do not. The room fell silent. The alien scientists looked at each other with expressions that clearly said they thought the human was foolish. How could primitive cave painters know something that advanced galactic science could not solve? The Galactic Council meets tomorrow, Jiho announced. They will decide whether to abandon this research completely. We have spent too many resources with no results. Give me time to investigate my theory, Minji requested. Just a few days. Your theory about extinct animals? Vorth's laugh was harsh. Human, your species has been in space for barely 2 centuries. We have been studying the universe for thousands of years. Minji's face remained calm, but Jiho noticed her hands tighten. Slightly. Sometimes fresh eyes see what experienced ones miss. Waste of time, said Neela. We should focus on real science, not human fantasies. After the meeting ended, Jiho found himself alone with his thoughts. He looked out at the burning ice plains. Again. Tomorrow the Galactic Council would likely order them to pack up and leave. 300 years of failure would finally end in defeat. But something about the humans' confidence bothered him. Minji had not seemed surprised or discouraged by their dismissal. She had expected it. That worried him more than he wanted to admit. That evening, Jiho checked the station's records. Minji had requested supplies for a camping trip, cold weather gear, food for several days, and navigation equipment. She planned to go into the wilderness alone. He considered stopping her. The areas beyond the research station were dangerous and unexplored. But humans were stubborn, and Minji was an adult who could make her own choices. The next morning, Minji was gone. Her room was empty, her supplies missing. She had left before dawn without telling anyone her destination. Jiho found a note on his desk that simply said, "Some answers can only be found by those willing to look where others will not go." Standing at his window, Jiho watched the sun rise over the burning ice plains. Somewhere out there, a human woman was walking alone into one of the most dangerous places in the galaxy, following a theory that everyone else thought was impossible. For the first time in months, Jiho felt something he had almost forgotten: hope. Minji walked through snow that reached her knees. The cold bit at her face despite her protective gear. She had been hiking for 6 hours since leaving the research station before dawn. Her breath came out in white clouds that froze and fell to the ground like tiny crystals. The landscape around her was empty and white. No trees, no rocks, just endless snow and ice stretching in every direction. But Minji was not lost. She followed stone markers that most people would never notice. Small piles of rocks stacked in careful patterns. Ancient trail signs left by people who lived here thousands of years ago. Her tablet beeped softly. The GPS showed she was moving away from all mapped areas. Soon she would be in parts of Cathara that no one had explored. The alien scientists back at the station thought these regions were empty wastelands, but the cave paintings told a different story. As the day grew warmer, Minji stopped to rest and eat. She pulled out her photos of the cave art and studied them again. The mammoths in the drawings were huge, much larger than the ancient elephants from Earth. They had thick fur that seemed to sparkle in the painted sunlight, and they walked on ice that glowed with strange light. Burning ice. The artists had somehow known about the ice that burned. They had painted it as a glowing path that the mammoths crossed without fear. Either the ancient people had seen this happen, or the stories were too detailed to be just imagination. Minji packed her things and continued walking. The stone trail markers led her toward a range of low hills that did not appear on any map. As she climbed higher, the wind became stronger and colder. But she also began to see something that made her heart race. Footprints. They were huge, round, prints pressed deep into the snow. Each one was bigger than Minji's entire body. The prints were fresh, maybe only a day old. Something very large had walked this way recently. Minji followed the tracks carefully. They led her over the hills and down into a valley that was protected from the worst winds. Here the snow was not as deep, and patches of dark ground showed through. Strange plants grew in clusters, their leaves thick and waxy to survive the cold. At the far end of the valley, Minji saw movement. She crouched behind a large rock and pulled out her binoculars. What she saw made her forget to breathe. Mammoths. Real, living mammoths. There were 5 of them, each one standing over 4 meters tall. Their bodies were covered in thick fur that seemed to shimmer with its own light. The fur was not brown or gray like earth elephants. Instead, it sparkled, with blues and whites like frozen starlight. The largest mammoth was clearly the leader. She was ancient, with wise eyes and tusks that curved in perfect spirals. Scars on her hide told stories of a long life in this harsh world. Minji decided to call her Nari, after her grandmother, who had also been strong and wise. The mammoths moved slowly through the valley, using their trunks to dig through snow and find the hardy plants beneath. They made soft rumbling sounds to communicate with each other. The sounds were deep and musical, almost like singing. Minji watched them for over an hour. She noticed that their fur did more than just keep them warm. Tiny ice crystals grew in the fur and caught the light. The crystals seemed to pulse with energy, creating patterns that moved across each mammoth's body like living art. As the sun began to set, the mammoths gathered together in the center of the valley. They formed a circle with the youngest ones in the middle. Nari, the eldest, lifted her trunk toward the distant glow that marked the edge of the burning ice plains. Then something amazing happened. The crystals in their fur began to glow brighter. The light pulsed in rhythm, connecting all 5 mammoths in a network of soft blue radiance. The energy in their fur resonated with the same frequency that Minji had seen in the research station's readings from the burning ice. They were connected to it somehow. The mammoths and the ice shared the same type of energy. Minji tried to move closer for a better view, but her foot slipped on loose snow. The sound echoed across the quiet valley. All 5 mammoths turned toward her hiding place. For a moment, Minji was terrified. These creatures were massive and wild. They could easily crush her if they felt threatened. She stayed perfectly still, hoping they would ignore her and go back to what they were doing. But Nari did something unexpected. The great mammoth left the group and walked slowly toward Minji's hiding place. Each step made the ground shake slightly. The crystalline fur glowed brighter as Nari approached. Minji forced herself to stand up. Running would be useless. The mammoth could catch her easily. Instead, she stepped out from behind the rock and faced Nari directly. The ancient mammoth stopped just a few meters away. She was even more magnificent up close. Her eyes were deep brown and full of intelligence. The crystals in her fur sparkled like stars, and Minji could feel warmth radiating from the great creature despite the cold air. Nari extended her trunk toward Minji. Not aggressively, but carefully, like she was trying to understand what this small human was doing in her valley. Minji held perfectly still as the trunk touched her gently. Nari sniffed her clothing, her equipment, even her hair. The mammoth seemed curious rather than angry. Then Nari made a sound. It was soft and musical, almost like a question. The other mammoths in the distance responded with similar sounds. They were talking about her. "Hello," Minji whispered. "I am not here to hurt you." Nari tilted her massive head as if listening. The crystals in her fur pulsed with soft light. For a strange moment, Minji felt like the mammoth could understand her emotions even if not her words. The moment was interrupted by a distant sound. Engines. Aircraft, approaching from the direction of the research station. Nari heard it too. Her ears flapped in alarm, and she trumpeted a warning to the other mammoths. The herd immediately began moving toward the far side of the valley, away from the approaching noise. But Nari paused and looked back at Minji. The ancient mammoth's eyes seemed to hold a message. Then she followed her herd into the growing darkness. Minji watched them disappear over the hills just as 3 aircraft appeared above the valley. Searchlights swept across the snow, looking for her. She recognized the ships from the research, Station Jiho had come looking for her. As the ships landed and alien scientists in protective suits rushed toward her, Minji smiled. She had found what she was looking for. The mammoths were not extinct. They were very much alive, and they held the secret to crossing the burning ice plains. But more importantly, Nari had accepted her presence. The ancient mammoth had shown curiosity instead of fear. That meant something. It meant that maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for understanding between species that had never met before. The real question was whether the mammoth would trust her enough to share their ancient knowledge. "Minji," Jiho called as he approached through the snow. "Are you hurt? We were worried when you disappeared." "I am fine," Minji replied, still watching the hills where the mammoths had vanished. "But I found something incredible." She decided not to tell them about the mammoths yet. Not until she understood more about what she had witnessed. Some discoveries needed time to grow before they could be shared with the world. But as she followed Jiho back to the aircraft, Minji felt something she had not experienced since arriving on Cathara. She felt like she was exactly where she needed to be. 3 days had passed since Jiho brought Minji back to the research station. She had told him and the other scientists that she found nothing but empty valleys and old stone markers. They believed her story, mostly because they could not imagine what else she might have discovered. But Minji could not stop thinking about Nari and the other mammoths. Every night she dreamed about the crystalline fur that pulsed with light. Every morning she woke up with new questions about the connection between the mammoths and the burning ice plains. On the 4th morning, Minji made a decision. She would return to the valley. This time she was more careful. She left at night when everyone was sleeping. She took different supplies and followed a new route that would avoid the search areas. If the aliens came looking for her again, they would not find her quickly. The journey back took longer because she had to be careful not to leave obvious tracks. But by afternoon she reached the hills overlooking the Mammoth Valley. She used her binoculars to scan the area below. The mammoths were there, all 5 of them, moving slowly through their feeding grounds. Nari stood apart from the others, as if she was watching and waiting for something. Minji climbed down into the valley, making no effort to hide. If Nari could sense her presence like before, then hiding was pointless. Better to approach openly and see what happened. The ancient mammoth noticed her immediately. Nari lifted her great head and looked directly at Minji, even though she was still hundreds of meters away. The other mammoths continued feeding, but Nari began walking toward her. They met in the center of the valley. This time Minji was not afraid. She stood calmly as Nari approached and extended her trunk. The mammoth sniffed her again, but more briefly than before. It was like Nari remembered her scent. "Hello again," Minji said softly. "I came back because I need to understand." Nari made that musical sound again. The crystals in her fur sparkled brighter for a moment. Then the mammoth did something that surprised Minji completely. She knelt down. Nari lowered her massive body until her shoulder was level with Minji's chest. The ancient mammoth turned her head and looked at Minji with one wise brown eye. The message was clear. She was offering to carry her. Minji's heart began beating faster. This was beyond anything she had hoped for. But where would Nari take her? And why was she offering this trust to a complete stranger? "You want me to climb on?" Minji asked. Nari made a soft rumbling sound that seemed like agreement. The crystals in her fur pulsed with gentle light, creating patterns that somehow felt welcoming and safe. Minji approached slowly and placed her hand on Nari's shoulder. The fur was thick and warm, and the crystals embedded in it were smooth like polished glass. As soon as she touched them, Minji felt something strange. Energy flowed from the crystals into her hand. Not painful or shocking, but warm and alive. The energy carried emotions with it. Patience, curiosity, and something that felt like hope. Carefully, Minji climbed onto Nari's broad back. The mammoth rose to her feet with surprising grace for such a large creature. Minji found herself sitting 4 meters above the ground, looking out over the valley from a completely new perspective. Nari began walking toward the far end of the valley. The other mammoths watched them go but did not follow. This was something between Nari and the human alone. As they walked, Minji began to understand more about the crystals in Nari's fur. They were not just decorations or protection from the cold. They were alive in their own way, responding to thoughts and feelings. When Minji felt calm, the crystals glowed softly. When she became excited or nervous, they pulsed faster. "You can sense what I am feeling," Minji said in wonder. Nari rumbled in response. The sound vibrated through her body and into Minji. For a moment, Minji thought she could sense something of what Nari was feeling too: ancient memories, long journeys across ice and snow, and loneliness. Deep, aching loneliness that had lasted for many years. They reached the edge of the valley and began climbing into the hills beyond. Nari moved with purpose, following paths that only she could see. As they traveled, the landscape began to change. The snow became thinner, and the ground beneath showed patches of dark ice. They were approaching the burning ice plains. Minji felt her excitement growing, and the crystals in Nari's fur responded by glowing brighter. But she also felt fear creeping in. What if Nari planned to walk onto the ice? What if the ancient mammoth was wrong about whatever protection she thought she had? "Nari," Minji said quietly, "are you sure about this?" The mammoth stopped walking and turned her great head to look back at Minji. The expression in those brown eyes was patient and kind, but also determined. Nari had made a decision, and she would not change her mind. They continued forward until they reached a ridge that looked down over the burning ice plains. From here, Minji could see the ice stretching endlessly into the distance. It looked normal and peaceful in the afternoon light. But she knew that anything that stepped on it would burst into flames within seconds. Nari stopped at the very edge of the ridge and lowered herself to the ground again. She was giving Minji a chance to climb down if she wanted to, a chance to turn back before they went further. But as Minji sat on the mammoth's back, looking out over the impossible ice that burned without heat, she realized something important. The fear she felt was not just about the danger. It was about the unknown. All her life, Minji had been taught that science was about controlling nature, finding ways to overcome obstacles and bend the world to serve intelligent purposes. But sitting on Nari's back, feeling the living energy of the crystals in her fur, Minji understood that there might be a different way. What if the secret was not to overcome the ice, but to understand it? What if the burning ice plains were not an obstacle to be conquered, but a living thing to be befriended? The alien scientists back at the research station approached every problem with technology and force. They built shields and barriers and machines. But what if the ice did not respond to force? What if it responded to something else entirely? Trust, understanding, connection. Minji placed her hand on Nari's neck and felt the crystals pulse with warm light. The mammoth's emotions flowed through the connection: determination, confidence, and something else that took Minji a moment to recognize. Love. Not romantic love, but the deep caring that comes when one being chooses to protect another. Nari was not just offering to carry Minji across the ice. She was offering to risk her own life to help a member of a species she had never met before. "Why?" Minji whispered. "Why are you willing to do this for me?" Nari made a sound that was different from her other calls, softer and more complex. The crystals in her fur began pulsing in patterns that seemed almost like language. As the patterns flowed across the mammoth's body, Minji began to understand. The mammoths had been alone for too long. They were the last of their kind, the only ones who remembered how to cross the burning ice. They had been waiting for someone who could learn from them, someone who could carry their knowledge to others. They had been waiting for her. Nari rose to her feet again and took a step forward. They were at the very edge of the burning ice plains now. One more step would take them onto the ice that had killed everything else that tried to cross it. Minji felt the crystals in Nari's fur beginning to change. They pulsed faster and brighter, and the energy flowing through them became stronger. The mammoth was preparing for something. "Are you ready?" Nari seemed to ask, though she made no sound. Minji took a deep breath and tried to calm her racing heart. She thought about all the failed attempts to cross the ice, all the technology and weapons and shields that had been burned to ash. Maybe they had all been trying to fight something that did not want to fight. Maybe they had been approaching it wrong from the very beginning. "I trust you," Minji said quietly. Nari stepped forward onto the burning ice plains. The moment Nari's massive foot touched the burning ice plains, Minji felt the world change around them. The ice beneath them began to glow with soft blue light, but there were no flames, no burning. Instead, the ice seemed to welcome them. Minji held her breath, waiting for the fire that had destroyed everything else that tried to cross these plains. But nothing happened except the gentle glow that spread outward from where Nari stood. The crystals in Nari's fur began singing. It was not a sound that Minji heard with her ears. Instead, she felt it through her connection with the mammoth. The crystals were creating vibrations that matched the energy in the ice below. They were talking to each other in a language older than words. Nari took another step forward. The ice glowed brighter, creating a path of light that stretched ahead of them. With each step, the light grew stronger and the singing became clearer. The ice was not fighting them. It was guiding them. "How is this possible?" Minji whispered, though. She was afraid to speak too loudly and break whatever magic was happening. Through her connection with Nari, Minji began to understand. The burning ice plains were not just ice. They were alive in a way that no one had realized. The ice was a living consciousness that had been hurt and frightened by centuries of creatures trying to force their way across it. Every ship, every robot, every protected suit that had tried to cross the plains had approached with aggression. They came with shields and weapons, and the intention to conquer. The ice had defended itself the only way it knew how, by burning everything that threatened it. But Nari approached differently. The mammoth came with respect and friendship. The crystals in her fur spoke to the ice in harmonies of trust and understanding. Instead of trying to overcome the ice, Nari was asking permission to pass, and the ice was saying yes. They walked deeper onto the plains, following the path of light that the ice created for them. Around them, the landscape was beautiful in ways that no one had ever seen before. The ice formed patterns like frozen music with curves and spirals that seemed to dance in the blue glow. Behind them, their footsteps left no marks. The ice healed itself after they passed, erasing all trace of their journey. It was as if they were walking on water that instantly froze and reformed with each step. Hours passed as they traveled across the plains. Minji lost track of time in the wonder of what she was experiencing. The ice sang to them constantly now, creating melodies that filled her mind with peace and joy. She felt like she was part of something much larger than herself. Through Nari, she began to sense the history of this place. Long ago, many different creatures had crossed these plains regularly. The ice had been a bridge between different parts of the world, welcoming all who approached with good intentions. But as the centuries passed, fewer beings understood how to communicate with the ice. They came with fear and suspicion instead of trust. They brought weapons instead of songs. Slowly, the ice became defensive and hostile, protecting itself from those who would harm it. The mammoths had been the last ones to remember the old ways. For generations, they had crossed the plains regularly, maintaining the ancient friendship between their people and the living ice. But as their numbers dwindled, the crossings became less frequent. Now, Nari was the last mammoth who remembered how to speak with the ice. She was the keeper of knowledge that had almost been lost forever. As they walked, Minji realized that she was learning this ancient language too. The crystals in Nari's fur were teaching her, sharing their vibrations and harmonies. She could feel her own emotions beginning to resonate with the ice below. When she felt wonder, the ice glowed brighter. When she felt gratitude, the path ahead became clearer. The ice was responding to her feelings just as it responded to Nari's. "I understand now," Minji said softly. "It is not about technology or force. It is about connection." Nari rumbled in agreement. The ancient mammoth was pleased that Minji was beginning to understand. Through their bond, Minji felt Nari's relief. The knowledge would not die with her after all. It could be passed on to others, but their journey was not without challenges. As they moved deeper into the plains, the ice began testing them. Strong winds rose up, trying to push them off the path of light. The temperature dropped until Minji's breath froze in the air. Each time a challenge arose, Nari responded not with resistance but with patience. She would stop walking and let the crystals in her fur sing more strongly. The vibrations would spread through the ice, calming whatever disturbance had arisen. Minji learned to help with this process. When the winds grew fierce, she focused on feelings of peace and calm. When the cold became bitter, she thought about warmth and friendship. The ice responded to these emotions, settling back into harmony. The most difficult test came when they reached the center of the plains. Here, the ice was older and more powerful than anywhere else. It rose up around them in towering walls that sparkled with inner light. This was the heart of the living consciousness that controlled the entire region. The ice spoke to them directly here, not through songs or vibrations, but through images that appeared in Minji's mind. She saw the history of the plains from the ice's perspective. Centuries of loneliness and fear. Attacks from creatures who did not understand. The gradual loss of friends who had once crossed in peace. The ice was curious about Minji. She was, not like Nari, who belonged to the world of the plains. Minji was something new. A being from far away who somehow could learn the ancient language of trust and respect. "I want to help," Minji said aloud. "I want others to understand what you really are." The ice considered this. Through the images in her mind, Minji saw what the ice feared most. That more creatures would come with weapons and shields trying to force their way across. That the attacks would become worse as technology improved. But Minji also showed the ice her own memories. The research station full of scientists who wanted to understand, not destroy. Beings from many different worlds who could learn to approach with respect instead of aggression. Slowly, the ice began to trust her intentions. The walls around them lowered, and the path of light ahead became brighter than ever before. The ice was willing to try again. Willing to welcome others if they came with the right intentions. They walked for 2 more hours before reaching the far side of the plains. As they stepped off the ice onto normal ground, Minji felt a sense of loss. The connection with the living ice faded, leaving behind only memories of the incredible journey. But the connection with Nari remained strong. The crystals in her fur still pulsed with shared understanding. They had accomplished something that no one thought possible. They had crossed the burning ice plains and lived to tell about it. More importantly, they had learned that the ice was not an enemy to be conquered. It was a friend waiting to be understood. Nari knelt down so Minji could climb off her back. And Minji's feet touched solid ground. She felt exhausted but triumphant. They had done something amazing together. "Thank you," Minji said, placing her hand on Nari's trunk. "Thank you for trusting me." Nari made her musical sound one more time. Through the crystals, Minji felt the mammoth's emotions, pride in what they had accomplished, hope for what might come next, and friendship that would last forever. Behind them, the burning ice plains glowed softly in the afternoon light. But now Minji knew that the glow was not threatening. It was welcoming. The ice was ready to make new friends, if they approached, with open hearts instead of closed fists. The question now was whether anyone would believe what they had discovered. As they began the journey back toward the research station, Minji smiled. She had proof of what was possible. And more importantly, she had learned something that could change how the entire galaxy thought about communication with unknown worlds. Sometimes the most powerful force in the universe was not technology or weapons. Sometimes it was simply trust. The return journey across the burning ice plains was even more wonderful than the first crossing. This time, the ice knew Minji and welcomed her like an old friend. The path of light appeared instantly when Nari stepped onto the plains, and the singing of the crystals was filled with joy. But something had changed. The ice was no longer content to simply allow them passage. It wanted to show them something important. As they walked, the ice beneath them began forming new patterns. Instead, Of the smooth path they had followed before, raised sections appeared that looked like ancient ruins. Buildings and roads made entirely of glowing ice rose up around them, creating a city that had never existed but somehow felt familiar. Minji gasped as she realized what she was seeing. These were not random shapes. They were memories. The ice was showing them how this place had looked long ago, when many different species crossed the plains regularly and built temporary shelters along the way. It was a meeting place, Minji whispered in wonder. Different peoples came here to trade and share knowledge. Through Nari, she felt the mammoth's agreement. The ancient creature remembered stories passed down from her ancestors about the great gatherings that used to happen on the plains. Representatives from dozens of worlds would meet here, using the ice as neutral ground where no weapons could function, and only peaceful intentions were allowed. The ice city around them showed signs of many different architectural styles. Some buildings were tall and thin like those the Veltans might build. Others were low and round like Quillen designs. Still others had shapes that Minji did not recognize, probably from species that no longer existed or had left the galaxy long. Aguant at the center of the ice city stood a great tower that spiraled up toward the sky. As they approached it, Minji saw that the walls were covered in symbols and pictures. It was a library of sorts where knowledge from many worlds had been preserved in the living ice itself. The ice invited her to dismount and explore. Nari knelt down, and Minji climbed off to walk among the frozen archives. When she touched the walls, images flowed into her mind, scientific discoveries, artistic creations, philosophical ideas from dozens of different civilizations. But most importantly, she saw the methods they had used to communicate with living worlds like this one. The ice had not always been alone and defensive. It had once been the center of a great community that spanned the stars. What happened to all of this? Minji asked. The ice showed her more images. Over time, the species that used the plains began to change. They became more interested in conquest than cooperation. They developed weapons that could force their way across the ice without needing to ask permission. The great gathering stopped happening because people no longer believed in peaceful communication. Eventually, the ice had been forced to defend itself by burning anyone who approached with hostile intentions. The ancient library and meeting places had been hidden away, waiting for the day when someone would come who still understood the old ways. That day had finally arrived. Minji spent hours exploring the ice city, learning everything she could. The knowledge stored here could revolutionize how the galaxy approached contact with unknown worlds. Instead of sending military ships and survey teams, they could send diplomats who understood how to communicate with planetary consciousnesses. When she finally climbed back onto Nari's back, the ice began to fade the city away, but not completely. It left small markers that would remain visible to anyone who approached with the right intentions. The library would be available to any future visitors who came seeking knowledge instead of conquest. They continued across the plains toward the research station. As they traveled, Minji felt the ice preparing something special. The vibrations in Nari's crystals were building toward something important. When they reached the edge of the plains closest to the research station, the ice did something unprecedented. Instead of simply allowing them to step off onto normal ground, it extended itself. A bridge of glowing ice stretched from the plains all the way to the research station itself. The bridge was impossible to miss. It blazed with blue light that could be seen for kilometers. Every person at the research station would know that something extraordinary was happening. Nari walked slowly across the bridge, giving the aliens plenty of time to come outside and witness what they were seeing. By the time they reached the research station, dozens of scientists had gathered to watch in amazement. Jiho stood at the front of the group, his large Veltan eyes wide with shock. Behind him, Vorth and Neela and all the other researchers stared in disbelief at the sight of a human riding a mammoth across a bridge made of the same ice that had killed everything else that touched it. Nari stopped just outside the research station and knelt down. Minji climbed off her back and walked toward the stunned scientists. "This is Nari," Minji announced calmly. "She and her people have been crossing the burning ice plains for thousands of years. They never forgot how to communicate with it." "Impossible," Vorth whispered. "The ice burns everything. We have tested it hundreds of times." The ice defends itself from those who approach with aggression, Minji explained. But it welcomes those who come with respect and friendship. She gestured toward the bridge that still glowed behind her. It wants to help us. It wants to be our ally, not our enemy. We just had to learn how to ask properly. Jiho stepped forward cautiously. How did you do this? What technology did you use? No technology, Minji said. Just trust and understanding. She placed her hand on Nari's trunk, and the crystals in the mammoth's fur began to glow. The light spread from Nari to the ice bridge, creating patterns that pulsed with peaceful energy. The mammoths are the teachers, Minji continued. They remember the old ways of communication. They can help us learn to speak with living worlds instead of trying to conquer them. Over the following hours, Minji demonstrated how the ice responded to different approaches. When the alien scientists tried to take samples with their usual equipment, the ice flared with warning fires. But when they approached with open hands and peaceful intentions, guided by Nari's example, the ice allowed them to touch it safely. The breakthrough came when young Kaya, Jiho's assistant, placed her hand on Nari's fur and felt the connection for herself. Through the mammoth's crystals, she experienced the same harmonic communication that Minji had learned. It is like music, Kaya said in wonder. The ice is singing to us. Word of the discovery spread quickly through the galactic communication networks. Within days, representatives from the Galactic Council arrived to witness the impossible bridge and meet the mammoth who had made it possible. But the most important moment came when the Council voted on new protocols for planetary exploration. Instead of sending military surveys to unknown worlds, they would now send teams trained in interspecies communication. Humans, with their natural empathy and emotional intelligence, would lead these missions. Minji became the first director of planetary communication, working with Nari and the other mammoths to establish a training center on Cathara. Young diplomats from across the galaxy came to learn the ancient arts of trust and understanding. The burning ice plains were renamed the Bridge of Worlds. The ice itself helped with the transformation, creating permanent structures for the new academy and maintaining safe passages for students and visitors. Nari lived for many more years, teaching countless beings how to communicate with living planets. When she finally passed away peacefully in her sleep, the ice preserved her memory in a special monument at the center of the bridge. But her legacy lived on in every successful first contact mission that followed. Across the galaxy, exploration teams approached new worlds with open hearts instead of weapons. They sang instead of threatened. They asked permission instead of demanding access. And on world after world, they found that the universe was much more alive and welcoming than anyone had ever imagined. The last mammoth had taught the galaxy that the most powerful force in the universe was not technology or military strength. It was the simple willingness to listen to those who were different from yourself. In the end, that lesson changed everything. Standing on the Bridge of Worlds years later, watching young diplomats learn to communicate with the ice, Minji smiled. She remembered the day when crossing the burning ice plains had seemed impossible. Now children played safely on the glowing surface while their parents learned to speak with living worlds. The bridge stretched out before them, no longer burning but welcoming. And in the distance, new mammoth calves grazed peacefully in the valleys, ensuring that the ancient knowledge would never be lost again. The galaxy had learned to build bridges instead of walls, and it all began with one woman who trusted a mammoth enough to climb on her back.